Republic radio show with your co-hosts Mike Tooman and Paul Burvid every Saturday noon until 2 on WRMN 1410 AM.com, 1410 AM, or streaming live on WRMN1410.com, or you can pick us up on the YouTube live channel of WRMN 1410's YouTube channel. We're here on the Fox River Valley Media channel. And you can call in at 847-931-1410. You can hit us up in the texts at 505-926-1410. So if you don't want to talk on the air, you can just send us a text, or you could make a comment on the YouTube live channel for Chief Guard of the Republic, WRMN. So we're live now. Hey, Paul, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Okay. Happy D-Day. 82 years. You know,
I'm dressed in honor of our allied friends, the Australians, which participated in D-Day, but only had a handful of actual troops on the ground. The rest of them were in the Navy and were in the Air Force.
Yeah, same with Poland. Poland had a large contingent there, and especially in the RAF, but they also had a couple destroyers bombarding positions very close to the coast. And this was about 19 hours ago. I mean, it didn't happen today. You'd think everything happens the same all over the world. But 19 hours from now was like pretty close to 12:15 a.m. over in Normandy, France. And that's when the first paratroopers from the 101st, the Pathfinders, the guys that, you know, find the drop zone and then light it up. And they try to secure it, you know, and the lights go straight up so the Germans can't see them, you know, and they want to set that up so the aircraft coming in know where to drop the soldiers. And but now it's just amazing that one day, like they call it the longest day, right? That one day, how much it meant to the entire world and everything else. And today I've ceased death scrolling. You know what that is, Paul? Doom scrolling.
Negativity?
Doom scrolling. Negativity. Yeah, looking for negative, everything bad out there. And, you know, sometimes I look for happy stuff, but social media has just got me, it just had me iffy. But I looked on the basic stuff today, and there's maybe one or two short stories. Oh, it's the 82nd anniversary of the D-Day landings. And there's nothing else out there. They got the big thing. Oh, it's a giant corruption that they redid the reflecting pole on the National Mall, right? It's like that's a bigger story. I'm like, oh, can you find something more negative instead of saying this is the day that Americans, mostly United States. They said I went into the AI, right? Asked the AI. I says, hey, could the United States have pulled off the Normandy landings on their own? And it said, no, there was too much logistics and everything else, and was bigger combination. I think we could have done a smaller landing alone, right? And then held out a little longer until we could establish a good port and bring in troops. But what I didn't ask artificial intelligence is, could they have done D-Day without the United States? And you know why I didn't ask artificial intelligence?
Because you'd break it.
Well, no, I already knew the answer. All right? No way. Britain wasn't ready, even with all the free French, the free Poles, the Canadians, the Australians, everyone over there, the South Africans, everyone, you know, if they packed the country with it and they got all their navies and all the possible logistics that they could amass, they would probably have enough ammunition and everything else to last on the beaches for a couple days, and then everything would have sputtered out. I already know that. So to kind of bring it up to date is that I think our nice European allies have forgotten about that. You know, they've forgotten about it. This is where you're talking about pulling out of NATO, right? And they're like, oh, well, they don't really care too much. They're like, that's never going to happen. And as long as the United States pulls their fair share, we don't have to pull ours because the United States is enough to take care of everything. You know, they know that. And they won't say it out loud. They won't say it out loud. They'll be like, oh, you know, we're all one, you know, not one country in NATO is better than anyone else. We're all one. No. The United States is, you know, you could pull together all those powers in NATO. And without the United States there, even against a single entity like this, Russia, right? They would have a big problem. That, you know, depending on if it goes like 100% total war. So I like to remember D-Day is like the day the United States showed everyone we're the big boy on the block. Right, Paul?
Yeah, but you know, there was another analogy to that. It was World War I.
Yep.
It had reached a stalemate, and until the United States entered, it was going to stay a stalemate. And you know, I had a supervisor one time at the state's attorney's office, and he said, you know, remember, he goes, they needed fresh horses, and they brought in the big guy from across the pond, and we did it twice. We were, you know, my cousin's a Baptist minister, and he does a lot of missions in Europe and in France. And he said something, and I go, you know what I remember? I go, if it wasn't for the French, would be speaking German at least twice now. Yeah. So, you know, people forget that, you know.
Here's the thing, all right? So when going back, getting to World War I there, so to tie this in, right? Which great European power, other than the Spanish, all right? Which was the great European power that we fought against previous to the Spanish?
The British.
The British. That's right. Who did the British support in the Civil War?
They supported the South.
The Confederacy, hoping to break up the United States and make it weaker. All right?
Correct.
So why did we go to war on the side of Britain instead of Germany? Did we ever fight a war against the Germans? Or the Austrians?
Actually, the Germans fought with us during the American Revolution.
Well, after we captured the Hessians. Well, yeah. Some of them did. You know, we captured the Hessians, and George Washington wouldn't allow turncoats into the federal forces, all right? So the Hessians would have been considered turncoats, and he's like, even though they were like mercenaries and everything, I don't want them in the federal forces because, you know, how are you going to trust them anyways? But we got a caller online, right?
I was asking if you wanted water, and I did the phone.
I thought he was going like this, and he's like, you need something to drink. I go, well, you got a bottle of vodka. I'll start slugging some down, you know. But all right, so the reason we didn't go to war on the German side, you know, and they drummed up all the, you know, fighting the Hun and everything else, all that other stuff. Because remember, what was the other language they were considering to make the official language of the United States?
German.
It was at the time. It was the largest language spoken other than English in the United States. So why do we go to war on side of the British? Well, we couldn't trade with the Germans. The English pretty much had a blockade of Germany, and we would have to use our Navy to bust that blockade to be able to trade with the Germans, and the British were just so much closer to trade with. So there's always a lot of money to be made in war and everything. So that's there. So now we come, because without our help, the British would have been hard pressed to be able to put enough troops into the field, and the French, you know, had already fought. You know, they're fighting with their with the Algerians and everyone else coming in the French, what do you call it, their colonies. They're bringing in the colonies to rearm their soldiers because it's a massive war of attrition. And of course, and that's the reason, like, my grandfather came over from Austria, well, the Austrian occupied part of Poland, because you had these, Austria wasn't drafting their ethnic minorities. I mean, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire covered Hungary, Romania, Transylvania, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, all, parts of Slovenia, they had all this, but they didn't trust the ethnic minorities. So they were just bleeding the Austrians and the Hungarians dry, and then the Germans were bleeding dry in the war of attrition. And then they started to draft their minorities because they're running out, right? And then we come over, the Zimmerman letter, right? The Zimmerman letter, the unrestricted submarine warfare, right? The Lusitania, right? Everything comes in. And of course, like we talked about last week in the Spanish-American War, our good friends in the press spinning everything up, all right, to what they want the country to do. What these
Citizen Hurt.
Yeah, they, hey, I'll use my paper to convince the mobs. They honestly, they only consider us the mobs, right? That's what these elitist scum. We're a mob. We're a mob. We're a mindless mob. But if they can control enough of the mindless, right, and put their ideas in these people's heads, then those people are going to push the government to do what they want to do. If they can't use bribery and other direct influence. All right, so now, of course, World War II is a different matter now, because now after World War I, we have a more peaceful relationship with Great Britain, right? They're like, oh, we're putties again. You came over here and saved us. Oh, the doughboys and everything. You came over here and saved us. And look at the background, right? Who attacked us first, Paul?
The Japanese.
And then who declared war on us 3 days later?
The Germans.
They walked right into, here's the thing, if Germany hadn't declared war on us, where would be our legitimacy to go in war with the Germans?
There wouldn't be.
There wouldn't. We didn't have a pact with anyone. We didn't have a pact with Great Britain. We didn't have a pact with Russia. We're selling them stuff, all right? We're providing escort for these convoys. There's still submarine warfare there, but that's the risk you take, right? Like the Straits of Hormuz now, right? But going after the Japanese first, putting all of our manpower to the east instead of to the west. But right after Germany declared war on us, what did we have?
A world war.
Well, yeah, the World War, but we had the Europe first, Germany first, all right? Technically, Japan declared war on us first, then Germany declared war on us, but our policy was Europe first, German first. All the efforts into defeating Germany first, and actually the Pacific was, they will hold our own or whatever until.
Well, the Pacific. Actually, in a lot of ways, though, they were similar. The Pacific was an island hopping campaign, okay? And Europe was a continent hopping campaign, because we went from island to island in the Pacific, but we went to North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and then all the way up to the mainland. So the strategy was escalation every time. Move forward, move forward, move forward. And then, but in a different perspective, because the Pacific was island campaigns, and in Europe, they were land-based campaigns.
Well, yeah, you had big cities in Europe, and you had a direct threat to Great Britain, right? I mean, close. Correct. Where the air is going over there, the missiles are going over there. You had a fleet that's kind of locked up, but you still have this fleet warfare.
You know something though. You know something strange that I didn't realize till 2 nights ago. It wasn't until after D-Day that the vengeance weapons started. They started 10 days after D-Day. First was the buzz bombs, the V1s, and then several weeks later were the V2s, the ballistic missiles. They did not start until after we entered the European continent through Normandy. I did not know that.
One of the reasons we call them vengeance weapons, but after D-Day, the Germans did not have a lot of aircraft within the area, and I think they the story in the longest day, only 2 Focke-Wulf 190s took off, right? They Focke-Wulf 190. Your message, Schmidt. And ME 109. No, the Focke-Wulf 190s.
They were 190s, yeah.
Yeah, took off, made one strafing run, came down on the beaches, made one strafing run, and left. All right. And then a couple weeks later, they pushed 800 more combat aircraft towards the Western Front. And we smeared them. We had absolute air superiority. They say we did it in, I like this artificial intelligence, that it was a war of attrition. Honestly, by that time, we had very experienced pilots, and they had gone from, bomber escorting, right? They literally, these bomber escorts would fly out, and then they ditched the bombers because they were told, go after the German intercept aircraft on the ground. Find out where they are. Hit them first before they get up and shoot down the bombers. Why defend the bombers when you can hit them on the ground? So we wiped out their air force, right? And so you still got to put, now Great Britain has got to think, oh, well, we're safe from being bombed, right? Because the Germans don't have any high-altitude bombers that could come in, any multi-engine, long-range bombers coming all the way from Germany. Now they got to fly over our, better airspace, right? So what do? You send in the unmanned, the missiles, right? Not as accurate, but still a terror weapon because it carries a large warhead. It does a lot of destruction, right?
Well, the V1s killed over 6,000 people and they damaged 75,000 buildings.
Yeah.
This is very interesting.
Compare that to Dresden.
Right. Yeah.
There's no comparison.
This whole concept, though, is very interesting because it was no surprise that an invasion was coming. Okay, nobody was surprised with this. All right, and the United States had moved more than 1 million people and 50,000 pieces of equipment, and they were hiding them in different places in the forests in southern Europe. And this was in 43, late 43. They had decided that they were going to be entering Germany in the spring of 44, and they decided that they were going to have Eisenhower as the commander. Okay?
Supreme Allied Commander, yes.
That is correct. And up until that point in time, the British had been planning for the invasion, and all the stuff about the Ghost Army that Patton was in charge of, that had the blow up tanks and all that stuff to mislead the Germans. But by then, we had air superiority, as you're saying, and the Germans were not able to get very good recon of where the positions were or the buildup. They didn't even know, to the extent of the troops and the ships and everything. But they had fortified the coastline, okay, with concrete and barriers and things like that. But they had assumed that the barriers were inviolate, that nothing could penetrate them. But Hitler replaced the leader with Rommel, okay?
Rommel's an open field commander.
Right, and he started taking some steps which hindered us on D-Day. He flooded the areas that would be eventually paratroop drops. and there's a lot of troops that died when they hit the swamps, okay, because they couldn't get untangled. But he's the one that flooded that area. But he said in late 43, early 44, that the whole matter would be decided in 24 hours.
Yes.
That it was a 24-hour battle, and if they didn't hold them or win it, there would be an ultimate defeat. And then you know what happened?
We held for 24 hours.
Well, wait. Rommel went home for his wife's birthday, which was June the 6th. And they wouldn't wake Hitler up because they thought he was getting crazy. Okay.
Well, they knew he was getting crazy.
Yeah. Well, they for sure thought he was getting crazy.
Not just crazy, crazy-er.
And what they did was they lost the advantage of the 24 hours. And by then,
so
within the first 24 hours, there were already 50,000 Allied troops taking, not deep, but along the coastline, 80 miles, and were over a mile into the continent by then. And then they were getting successfully reinforced. So it was just a matter of time from that.
Yeah, so we go on, and I think we will go on a little bit, and what ifs and whys, why fours and Hutus and everything like that. And like we pushed in, and there's like a 24-hour thing, and like we're just pushing in from the beach. But the main thing was, not the main thing, but in the beginning, because it's all working together, right, is all those airborne troops that go in there. And the airborne troops were there specifically to destroy areas or hold areas away from the Germans where they can push forces through to reinforce the beach and to have a counterattack. Now, that's a little hard to do for airborne troops to fight against heavy armor, right? To fight against that heavy armor, the air armor can just like roll over them and push right through to the beachheads and try to push us into the water or here's the thing, create such a massive destruction on that beachhead that it's like, it's not even worth staying there anymore. You know, like just nothing but dead bodies. Bring up heavy artillery, bombard the beachheads. You know, the chances of naval artillery getting to you without an accurate spotter is even harder. But the aircraft, you're doing it at night. You know, you don't need to be accurate hitting the beach, all right? You know where the beach is. You know where that beach is, right? All you have to do is start driving high explosives on anywhere on that beach. You're going to hit someone, you're going to hurt someone, right? Because it's so densely packed. The difference is you throw a 14 or 16-inch gun over the horizon onto the ground. You got to be, even though the big caliber, you got to be pretty accurate to find that one gun or that one battery that's blowing the hell out of the beach. And they're just loading, you know, it's not accuracy, it's just fire for effect. Load one after another. Pepper that beach. All right, so when we come back, we're going to talk more about the greatest battle of the last century, not my lifetime. Few people were alive during that time. You know, my mom was alive, but she was, 1938, so. All right. Show with your co-hosts Mike Tooman and Paul Burvid every Saturday noon until 2. I think I said noon until 1 last time, but noon until 2, WRMN 1410 AM. And you could go to the WRMN1410.com and you could hit either stream live and you'll get the audio, or you could say watch on YouTube, and boom, we're live on YouTube. There's a couple seconds delay, microsecond delay on the YouTube feed. So, if you're betting on the ending and you're really quick, So, you call in here at 847-931-1410. You can text 505-926-1410, or you could just make comments on the YouTube channel. So, Paul, all right, so we're talking about D-Day, right? And I got to say one thing about it right now, and I think it's pretty much a fact, all right? Tanks don't float.
That's correct.
I mean,
And as you know, my dad was on an LST, and that was the boat that was made basically in the Midwest as a jigsaw puzzle in sections, and it was put on the rivers and tributaries in the Midwest, basically, and floated to the Gulfs and the various areas. And what they did was it was designed universally to fit, I believe, 90% of the beaches in the world, where it had a flat bottom and it carried men and tanks. And actually, the permanent crew was less than, I believe, 70. But it had berthing for Marines and also for Army troops. And what would happen is, as it would go into shore, it would lower an anchor in the back, and it would beach itself, and it had huge clamshell doors that were watertight, and it had an elevator, and then from that, the tanks would disembark, and so would the other vehicles and the docks and the half tracks and everything, and then hit the shore. But in addition to that, there were two things that were designed in England called mulberries. They were artificial harbors that they would go up to, and that they would also have heavy material egress from them and hit the beachheads there once the beachheads were secured.
Yeah, and you know what? The reason I said that is because they tried to invent like a floating tank, right? Well, it would swim, right?
Right.
Short distances, not in choppy water, you know?
Right.
But
it had big snorkels that would get the water for the air for the engines
and everything, right? But once you swamp that thing, you know, a several-ton tank doesn't have a lot of buoyancy. Once it starts taking water, it doesn't have enough air buoyancy to keep the tank afloat without the canvas boat that they put around it, you know? So it's only meant to, like, oh, crap, we dropped it 50 feet too early, right?
Right.
And now the tracks can't touch the sand, right? So now it swims that 50 feet, you know, takes it a couple seconds, it gets traction in the sand, and it's going up the beach, right? But they're taking the, you know, this is, the operation is so large, right? It's such a large operation, and you can't micromanage this stuff, right? And unfortunately, the guys at the bottom, right? The guys at the bottom can't scream loud enough to be heard by the top. You understand? All right? And I realized this from my time working at the Pentagon. And I had always been a low-level tactical guy, in the mud, living in a tent, living in a bee hut, driving trucks, all right? As a W-3, I'm driving trucks because they don't have enough privates with licenses, right? So they do some war planning and everything, and they have war games to war game this stuff out. And most of the guys that are doing the war games are staff guys. They've been on the staff, and they know they're very highly educated, you know, strategic intelligence guys, you know, operational, big-time logistic guys and everything. And they don't have a lot of the guys that are actually been working this stuff, right? Someone, you know, the little kid in the emperor's new clothes, right? Like the guy in the tank, and they've practiced this tank with river crossings, you know, pond crossings or something. It kind of worked out. But another guy's like stuck down there as the driver, and he's screaming, "This ain't gonna float. This ain't gonna float." And no one's hearing him. But you know what happens is sometimes you get commanders that say, "I don't want to hear it. Just do the job." Right? And then when the job fails,
it's like, make it so, Mr. LaForge.
Yeah,
and then
make it so. Well, okay. Yeah. Well, you know, but there's a point in time, and no one wants to be that guy that says we're not going to do this, and I just the complexities of that, where it's sometime you got to take the little guys in, right? And you got to sit them where no one can see them. You got to give them an anonymous, and they got to ask these big generals these questions, right? You know? And then the big generals at the top have got to see this. They got to make time for the little things, too. All the little, simple little things that can have a big effect. So they counted on having armor support to suppress machine gun nests, right? And to have that 70 millimeter cannon blow holes in the smaller machine gun bunkers. Not the big ones, right? But the smaller ones, right? And something for the infantry to hide behind. And even minefield rollers to go up and clear these mines and everything. And they're not there now because someone said tanks can float. Right? I think one of them made it to the beach, but not because he swam all the way out from. It swam all the way out from the LST or the ship, right? It made it because the LST got in close enough where it could come up on the shore, right?
Well, you know, that's true too, because when the LSTs, if they disembark too soon, but it was mostly like the Higgins boats that would do this. If guys got off of them and they're got full battle armor, they got like an extra 60, 70 pounds of equipment. You can't swim with that. You went right to the bottom. You know, if you were 8 feet short, you were drowning.
They all had even if you put that little air thing up there, you know, your little life preserver, right? Yeah. That's designed to keep your 150 to 200 pounds afloat, barely afloat. Barely afloat, right? Where your nose is out of the water and you're breathing, right? If you lay on your back. Put all that other weight on you, which you might not be able to get to because it's strapped on. You got your rucksack strapped on. You got maybe you got your rifle out, but you got your ammunition belt. You got the grenades. You got everything strapped onto you. You got your boots. You know, you're carrying an extra machine gun ammunition for everyone, right? You're carrying the radio, batteries for the radio, everything else. And yeah, you go out of there, bloop, right down. Right down. You know, so.
Mike, those guys were average Americans, but they were a special kind of brave.
Oh
they
my
were
God,
a kind of brave that no one could imagine, you know?
There's a time, where you're screaming at them to like, this is dumb, you know, this isn't going to work, everything else. But then they tell you to do it anyways. And what are you going to do? You can't desert, right?
Right.
You got to move forward. You got to go forward. And at that point in time, that's the where, leadership absolutely takes over. You're making decisions that you were never planned for. You know, like let's, get moving and everything. And then you got destroyer commanders that were told not to go in so close, and they nearly beached their destroyers just to get accurate fire on these bunkers.
Right.
Because they only had a 5-inch cannon is 127 millimeters. 12 centimeter, about 12 centimeters, right? Whereas some of the shore batteries were like 8-inch cannons, which had a longer range. So the shore batteries could actually outrange the destroyers. And the shore battery gets hit, it's 7 feet of concrete, right? And if you don't hit it just right with a heavy enough shell, it goes bing and just deflects off, Whereas one 8-inch cannon shell hits that destroyer, kaboom, right? Kaboom. It's going. It's going to pierce in there. It's going to blow up the magazines. It's going to do something. So at that time, again, who would anticipate that? Who anticipated all this? And everything, lots of death and destruction, but it worked out anyways. But the bravest guys, the bravest guys, no one laid down and said, nah, this ain't going to work. I've seen in peacetime, right? And I've seen in civilian life, especially with government workers, right? If they don't like something, if they have a personal preference for something else, They will slow walk something. They will intentionally sabotage it by feigned incompetence, right? They will just destroy a plan that was perfect because they don't like what the results might be. Personally, that with the hundreds of thousands of troops that were involved in this, I don't think there was one of them that feigned incompetence, slow walked anything to try to make this not happen. What do you think, Paul?
I think you're absolutely right. There were no gold brickers on that beach or in that invasion.
And you just push, get going, man. Get going.
They all persevered, and they did their best.
Yeah, and so now, all right, having been a paratrooper, right? And I could tell you, light infantry and everything. People ask why didn't they? And I went, I asked some of these questions myself and saw what the internet had for it. And a lot of people were asking why, if the bunkers are facing the beaches and they're facing out, right? They're facing out, and that's designed to stop an invasion. It's not designed, right, as the last line of defense before your own troops are pushing into the thing, so the guns just don't turn around, You'll have like trenches and stuff, maybe you could turn around in the trench, but the big guns don't. So why didn't the airborne troops come in from behind and take these? To take the pressure off the guys on the beach. And to explain it simply, right, is heavy artillery. So with the naval gun, the large naval guns, and air support, aircraft coming in and bombing stuff, close air support, you don't know who's who. So you got your paratroopers coming in on one side, you got your infantry guys landing from the beach coming in on the other side of these bunkers, and now you can't use your artillery. Because if you overshoot, you hit your own guys, which the airborne guys. If you undershoot, you hit your own guys on the beach, right? Big complications with that. But the airborne troops would have to be dropped with a lot of ordnance to even be effective against these bunkers, even from behind. 7 feet of concrete. I wonder how many satchel charges you have to carry and get them up to that bunker before you can blow it up. Even make an effect on it. It wouldn't do anything. It really wouldn't. Unless you put the satchel charges all inside, you're just going to scratch the outside of these things. Right? So they were there to keep the reinforcements from coming in, to seize key bridges, key road intersections, key lines of communications and supply, areas, what they call avenues of approach for German reinforcements. That's why the airborne troops were sent in there. That's why they didn't take these guys from behind. Now, the other thing, right, and I'm like picking at this stuff, but you can see where you got to make a choice. You're stuck in a real tough choice. I think that's one of the greatest things about Eisenhower, right? Before the battle even began, he wrote a letter saying, "It's all my fault that it failed." Before nothing failed, but he already took 100% responsibility. I haven't seen that in a lot of commanders. I haven't seen it at all, right? They're going to find out. He goes, well, someone told me, well, why did it fail? Well, someone told me tanks could float, and they assured me. And that's the only reason it failed, because some dude told me tanks could float. And he assured me, and I should have known, because, he should know, because he's the expert. I'm not an expert on floating tanks, but he was, something like that. He could have done any numerous things to throw off, right, the plane. But he didn't even know if anything was going to go wrong. But if it did, he already took supreme blame, right? So when you got supreme command, you take supreme blame. And I think that was a great thing about him. And it showed this guy, I can't imagine. And my brain would explode, the anxiety that would be on me, right? You got to have the anxiety to be on you, the overthinking that's going to be on you. A lot of people would be paralyzed and lack of make a decision, all right? Lack of decision making, all right? And you're like, that kills more people, right? Now you become decisive and say, yeah, we're going to do this. Well, win or lose, we're doing it. And now you become a commander that they fear, because if you're going to overthink things, they're going to make so many, variables out there that you can't make a decision. But guys that can make a decision like that and take responsibility, because they're not just, if they're taking responsibility, they're not making willy-nilly decisions, Paul. They're making their best decision possible, and they're making that decision. They've taken everything they could up to the time and said, hey, let's do this. So why didn't they have a longer bombardment of the beaches? Why didn't they just go off for like 2 or 3 days on these beaches? Because, one, your airborne troops can't survive that long. You got 3 divisions. You got the British, you got the 101st, and you got the 82nd. 37,000 troops is what they could have launched in one day. 37,000 troops. And they don't have weeks and months of supplies and ammunition. At the most, they got 3 days. And that's considering that you're having on and off engagements. If you're engaged constantly, that 3 days of supplies is gone in 12 hours. Now, you're fighting with bayonets, you're fighting with captured ammunition. You might still have food, you might have some water. Medical's all gone, right? But your ammunition is gone. You got to have air resupply. But do they know where to drop it and everything? So if you sat there bombarding these beaches for 2 or 3 days and dropping and having air bombing on it, you're sacrificing your airborne troops that are getting their asses handed to them, their bottoms handed to them by the German armor, all right? German armor coming overrunning them. So you lose 3 divisions, and the Germans still reinforce the beach. All right, so you blow everything up, but now they got tanks there. Right? So they had a very short bombardment, which wasn't effective enough to knock out the heavy stuff. But you're taking a risk there, because now you want to get troops on the beach, so you could definitely take that stuff out so that they can move forward and link up with the airborne. So now the airborne have logistical line of support. So now they get more ammunition. So now they get more, they can evacuate their wounded, right? So now the tanks come in, the anti-armor comes in, and now they're able to hook up with that and have a tank destroyer battalion with them and just knock out that stuff. So what do there's where you're risk averse and you say, okay, we can do this. That would seem prudent, right, Paul?
Right.
It would seem prudent to just bombard the heck out of this beach. But at the same time, right, you're announcing to the Germans which beach you're going to hit, right? So now they push reinforcements because you don't have the airborne troops there because you decided not to send them in. So they push reinforcements forward. They rearrange their other divisions. And, all right, so you're talking 10 days after, right? 10 days after they hit London, right? Because in my theory on this one is the guidance systems on those rockets were very
primitive,
but complicated to the fact that once you got them programmed in to hit London, right? Now you got to reprogram to hit the beaches, right? And they weren't really deadly accurate at hitting London. So if that 2,000 pounds of explosives falls short, you might drop it on an armored division headquarters of your own, right? If it goes far, you drop it into the ocean to no effect. All right? So, I talked about this because it's all hindsight. I wasn't there. The guys that were there were there. Once, and even Eisenhower's like, at that point, once you pull the trigger, you're like out of control. You're absolutely out of control, right? You have no control over what's going now. You can control reinforcements going in. The only thing you can control is like, call it off, stop, all right? And now you got to figure out how to get your guys off the beach, how to get the ships back, how to regroup, right? How to rebuild morale, right? Now that you played your hand, right, and given the Germans a moral victory, and their troops are all pumped up because, hey, look what we did to the Americans, right, or the British and everything on this thing. So it's out of your control now, right? So with 3 minutes, with the best, right, all the planning, 2 years of planning, could have been better. Everything could be. Whenever someone says could have been better, what's the answer?
It could always be perfect.
Yeah, it could always be better.
But you got to go with good enough.
Yeah, what's the enemy? What's the enemy of good enough? Perfect.
Complete failure.
Perfect. No, the enemy of good enough is perfect. Because if you still keep trying for perfection, right, and you never make that decision and you never attack, right, you never take that, you can't be risk averse, right? Sometimes there's taking too many risks, right? Cliff jumpers, all these other guys, no fear of heights, walking a high wire between two balloons without a safety net or a safety line or a parachute or everything. That's insanity. It's not risk. It's not, risk, enjoying risk taking, risk adverse, right? When you're risk adverse and you go, I need to take that hill, but I'm going to lose troops. So how do I mitigate losing troops, but I still have to take the hill? How do you mitigate losing troops? You don't take the hill, but maybe some other unit's going to lose, or the war is going to go over and people will die in the long run. So you can't be that risk averse, but you can mitigate everything. You can try to mitigate this stuff. So with all that,
it's critical analysis versus reckless analysis.
Yes, reckless, but you can't. The difference between Patton and Montgomery: height, accent, belligerence. Or it's not so much competence, right? They were both very competent commanders. Montgomery was very competent as a commander. He was a little more risk adverse, all right? Risk adverse. He was afraid of losing large amounts of troops, right?
Patton had a lot of confidence in himself.
Patton had a lot of confidence, but much like I watched the series. All right. Okay. So when we come back, we'll talk about the television series I watched. Maybe I can or can't plug it, but it was kind of excellent in the same way as risk adverse as opposed to reckless. Public radio show every Saturday, just on Saturdays, noon until 2. Maybe someday, if I get some sponsors that are going to pay me the big bucks, anyone's welcome to sponsor me. Pay me the big bucks out there. Well, yeah, there's some things that I won't be sponsored by, but I'll let you figure that out. Take a good guess whether I'm going to sponsor or not. Maybe I'll get a daily show. Who knows? Maybe they'll need someone to fill in here. There's an open offer for Dan Bongino. I know he's lost his radio show because he gave it away because he went to work for the man, with the FBI, and he lasted longer at the FBI than I did. So he's welcome to come in and visit. I'll let him visit, but he can't take over my show. And Amy Jacobson, that's the other one. But I guess she's got she's back on 560 on Saturdays doing a finance show. I think that might actually run in. I think we might actually be competing with her on 560.
She's actually on during the midday with some woman that was a politician, too.
Oh, something Ives.
Yeah, Jeannie Ives.
Jeannie Ives, yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like the right-wing version of The View without the without the video. Anyways, I'm sorry. I apologize. Anyway, so back to D-Day and back to we're not picking it apart here. It was awesome. It was awesome. So the show that I was watching was Grant. Grant is absolutely my favorite general and my favorite president. All right, all the rest of them. I go with Ulysses Grant every time. I go with Ulysses Grant as the best general. And Ulysses Grant had a vision, and his vision didn't include stopping, right? And here's the great thing about him that maybe a lot of our current military leaders should count on. There was a press corps that followed the armies around, and they had cameras, right? So they would take cameras, they'd get negatives, and then they were able to publish these pictures in the newspapers. There was a way to do that. And so the newspapers were following them around, and again, the press is trying to, doom scroll everyone. Oh, this is terrible. This is awful. Oh, look at all the troops you killed and everything. And look at that. Did you win the battle? Oh, the South lost a lot less. But you look at statistically, right? Statistically, unless the South killed off 2-to-1 ratio minimum, they lost the battle. They lost the battle. They couldn't win the war of attrition. They couldn't win the war of logistics. They couldn't win, constantly. And before, the Union generals would win a battle and then they'd let the South rest and regroup and come back, or they would get defeated and they would just completely withdraw. Grant was neither of those things. He was constant until the war was over, right? And that's the thing there, that once that D-Day was involved, you made that decision, you're going to take heavy losses, but statistically, you're going to do more damage to the Germans than they could do to you, right? Even though they're saying, oh, well, they killed off 2-to-1. Well, they'd have to kill off 4 or 5-to-1 to win the war of attrition there. And they weren't doing it. And they didn't do it. So again, the greatest battle ever, these guys going in there, the longest day, they didn't have 24 hours, right? Had they pushed the armor unit, had they woken up Hitler, right, and explained it to him in detail, and he didn't deny everything and just say, because I've seen guys, have you seen people where you tell them the truth and they could see it with their own eyes and they say, oh, that's just a feint. This is the real attack over here, right?
That's what they were expecting. Rommel and Hitler never thought it was coming in Normandy.
They Pas de Calais, because
Right.
it's shorter. It's a shorter distance, right? So it's shorter distance for air cover. If you had a real heavy artillery piece, you could probably launch it across the Pas de Calais, right? It's a shorter logistics thing. You almost build a bridge, right, and get in there. So they're expecting that. And of course, you had the buildup of the general that they were afraid of, because so Patton at the time was in timeout, right? They put him in timeout. Here's General Patton. And why did they put him in timeout? Because he looked bad to the press.
Right. He had at least 1 or 2 incidents that the press helped get him relieved of his command, and they were the press has been bad all along. They're not impartial like they should be.
They should give you the facts and let you make your own decision.
Right. Patton had his own style, and he didn't like people that were shell shocked, and people don't like that. But he also has his own. I said this on my YouTube channel once. Patton was a different kind of guy. He was big in the mechanization between World War I and World War II, and he was in charge of the tank command. And they used to do maneuvers in Louisiana, and they weren't going to be able to complete the maneuvers because they didn't have enough fuel. And Patton was wealthy. He was a wealthy guy. Came from a very wealthy family, born in California, had dyslexia and some other things. He used his own credit card at the time, his own charge card.
His own line of credit.
Well, back then he had a
letter of credit.
Yeah, and he used it to purchase the fuel to complete the operation.
Which is against federal law.
Right, but he got valuable training. The troops got valuable training, and it was all good. And he showed initiative when it was required.
All right. So one of the things, and we talked about this before, like you find a document marked top secret laying on the street, and you kind of read through it and you say, "This is some explosive stuff, man. This is really going to upset the status quo. This is really going to put an end to Iran, anything, right? This is really going to upset the status quo." And then you take it to the press and they pay you like, "Hey, I found this on the street." It's like finders keepers. I took it to the press and they paid me a finder's fee, $50,000 or whatever. I sold it to them. Boom. And like all of a sudden the press just rips with this, right? They rip with it. And we got a sensitive operation going, right? And that sensitive operation's multi-million dollars. And because it gets blown, right, a lot of the covers of people are blown and we lose a lot of operatives and some people die and everything else, right? Because the press wanted to be sensational and you wanted your 50 grand, right? So when you're in a war for the world, it's a world war. When you're fighting a war against an authoritative state, right, that has already had no qualms with invading its neighbors to seize territory, has, for that reason, to spread their ideology, right, has no qualms with unlimited warfare against your trade ships, is trying to cut off your trade with your trade partners and everything, right? And they got an ally in the East that has been slaughtering your prisoners of war. Slaughtering them, right? Terrible. Look at the rape of Nanking, right? Look what they did in Korea, everything. All these evil enemies, all right? And you're a press guy, and there's doctors and everything, and you're a press guy there, and Patton comes in. Of course, Patton is bigger than life, right? So he's not going to say no press because he's narcissistic, all right? Not a bit, sometimes it's not a bad thing, right? But he's very about himself. He's very sure of himself and everything. And then he thinks, if I just slap this guy, he'll grab up a rifle and he'll go to Berlin. He'll take Berlin all by himself if all I do is slap him, right? God knows what he's thinking. Like he's can lay his hands on and cure this guy or whatever. Like this is the way to do it, right? It might be like you're a sergeant in the trench and your guy's freaking out, right? He's freaking out and he's drawing fire on you and you're just like, whack, shut up, All right, so he does that. All right, so if you're an American-loving guy, you love America, you love the other soldiers, you love the GIs, I'm not saying cover up. What do you do in that situation? I'd be like, I didn't see nothing, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to contact whoever, right? I'm going to get a list of names of people that did see it, and I'm going to go to this guy's superior, who at the time was, Bradley, right? And say, dude, put this guy on a choke chain, like right now. Choke chain him. Because he can't be doing this stuff. He's a great leader and everything. He's a great military leader, push forward. He knew what to do. He was like Grant. Keep attacking the enemy. Make the enemy react to you, right? Use your logistics. Don't be risk averse. Say it's going to happen, then work to make it happen. Anticipate. He didn't come out in the Battle of the Bulge, right? He didn't come out with the plan that day. He had that plan 3 days ago. He knew what was going to happen, right? He anticipated. He told his people, he says, these guys are messed up, man, and we're going to help them, but I can't help them until I'm ordered to help them because I have this mission here. And failure to do that mission means that I'm, that it's bad, right? You're refusing the command. And at that level, he's already been messed up before. But all right, so he's the guy that they're terrified of. The Germans, not terrified, but they really respect him. They really respect him, right? And then go. So when they put when they put Patton in the South there, they're like, oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, this is the guy that they're going to use. Because what are you going to use? If you're going into a fight, right, are you going to use your best weapon first? Or are you going to use your crappy weapons? And then bring in the best later on? Well, you're going to
use your best weapons first.
Oh, my God, until you run out of them. So what happened, though, is they had, and we're talking D-Day there, and we brought up Patton, right? Is like, when did they bring him back?
They brought him back in approximately July.
And what was in July? The Felice pocket.
Toward Germany.
Yeah, well, there's the Felice pocket there.
Right.
You know, and so you had that stuff going. Was it the Felice? Anyways, yeah, so they bring him back because now they need his armor warfare, right? They need this guy to push. They need guys not to be sitting around, not to be risk averse, right? They need to shake up the Germans, because the Germans are pretty good with Montgomery, because they know exactly what he's going to do. He's going to plan everything out in detail. He's going to wait till he has overwhelming odds, and then maybe he'll attack if he's positively sure he can win. You know? At which point you fall back and let him expend all of his logistics and everything on a big nothing burger. But yeah. All right, so that's the thing. And then they have the blow up tanks. They also made plywood aircraft. They made all sorts of stuff, right? And they just sat it there. And there's a lot of things there. And then they actually had guys operating a ghost radio network, just passing information, you know, be like they had scripts. This is, this unit needs more toilet paper or something. And they're passing this information. On top of that, right, they dumped a dead body off the coast of Spain with a bunch of plans to invade Pas-de-Calais. Right? And they had Patton's whole army drawn up to do this massive invasion, like it was going to happen. And they made it look like this guy was, that this was completely accidental, that this guy shouldn't have had plans, right? And they scoop him up, and it gets sent right to the German embassy in Spain, because the Spanish may have been neutral, but who fought on the side of the royalists?
Spain.
No, it's Spain. Yeah, the royalists. All right? So you had the Spanish Civil War.
The Nazis.
The Nazis, yeah. The Germans fought on the side of the loyalists, royalists, right? The royal, right? The King of Spain. So Spain, although they're a neutral, they're very pro-Germany, because it's probably unlikely they would have won without German support. What did Germany do there? And this kind of circles back on some stuff. Germany took all of its newer weapons, right, and used them there, and he had a proving ground for these. All right? Where they're like, oh, yeah, these aircraft really work. These monoplanes, man, they just shoot the crap out of those biplanes, They're better. The guns are better, right? And then this artillery we brought in is better. The rifles, the training and everything they give. And what you do is you train the trainer. So you send some core troops over there. They get some combat experience. They come back, and you don't keep them in one unit like the Greeks, right? The Greeks, no, it wasn't the Greeks. It was the Persians, all right? The Persians had the immortals. And everyone says, oh, the immortals, they're just highly trained. They're really trained. They're the crack troops and everything. You know what the immortals were? They were the dudes that had survived at least one battle. So they took these guys that survived, and they put them all in one unit, right? And they wouldn't even let them watch the battle. They would turn around and not even face the battle. They wouldn't even watch it. And when it was time, right, for the key force to go in, the shock force, then they would turn them around and charge them. And they always had these guys, well, you weren't killed last time, probably won't get killed this time. But what you do is you disperse your troops throughout all your German forces, and now you got combat-hardened guys giving them, like, this is the way it happens on the ground, right? This is the way it worked in Spain. This is the way it might work here and everything. So you have a lot of new weapons being tested, right, at Normandy. swimming tanks. Okay, didn't work very well. The high water, high choppy water. Well, didn't you know the Atlantic and the English Channel were a little choppy? Yep. And why'd you plan it for spring? Why do you have a spring offensive, Paul?
For two reasons. First of all, the tide was at a perfect location at that time for them to be able to see the tank traps and everything. But number two, the moon, okay? And the moon was given the proper cover for the invasion. And they could only do it on the 4th, 5th, and the 6th, okay? And if it didn't happen at that time, it would have had to be done on the 16th, 14th, like through the 16th. So they did it meteorologically and climate-wise. That was the best time to do it. And there was a bad storm, and they thought that they were not going to be able to do it. But on the 4th, Eisenhower, because they had to know 2 days ahead of time, Eisenhower had committed the troops on the 4th for the late night flights on the 5th into the morning of the 6th.
And, okay, so summer is the perfect time because you don't have a lot of rains swamping your roads, slowing down your progress, all right? Summer and fall, all right? Fall is kind of nice because it's drier, right? It's cooler and everything. But summer and fall, giving you roughly 6 months of progress to move through to get deep inland, right? Maybe end the war, because this is blitzkrieg warfare. And we do know that the Germans had marched all the way to Paris in 30 days, both wars. Both wars. Both wars, they did that. So what's to make you think that once we got momentum going, that we couldn't get to Berlin in 30 days using mobile fighting style, armor, hopscotching, leapfrogging airborne divisions, right? Leapfrogging airborne divisions, boom, 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 boom. What makes you think? Well, in the winter, it's going to be a little harder to do that. The snow, the cold, the overcast, the trucks failing, everything failing, right? So it makes it a little harder in the winter. So you want to have as much time before winter hits, all right? And if you know you're not going to make it there by winter, what do you have to make sure your troops have?
Supplies and shelter.
Yeah, well, shelter, supplies, winter equipment. So you don't go in June wearing your greatcoat, right? Your wool greatcoat, which are warm. Oh my God, the wool overcoats, absolutely one of the best pieces of equipment ever. Really warm, but not too good in the summer. Not too good in the spring when it gets wet, kind of heavy and everything. But you want to have that come around November, right? Well, that's trouble with the German troops is they expected to take Moscow and be living in buildings, heated buildings in Moscow by winter, right? And they invaded what? They invade in June, all right? But they get bogged down and they get held to a stop, and then they didn't have the supplies, winter supplies for their guys to move the logistics there. They hadn't counted on that. So that's why you go as early as possible. They were even thinking of going in May, but you're right. There are charts out there, lunar charts. How much moonlight are we going to have? Now, if you're doing an airborne drop, how much moonlight do you want to have? None. Zero.
None. You don't want your guys to be seen coming down.
You don't want any light. You want no moon, right? You don't want the full moon. You want no moon at night. You want that right there, right? And then, of course, what do you want? You want low tide. You want the low tide because you want to be able to, one, get rid of all those traps and everything and move up. Move up, right? If you're at high tide, there's not enough beach for 100,000 troops to sit on. And that was a problem. At one point, one of the beach masters, right, The one guy they say, you're in charge of everything that comes on this beach and goes off the beach. And you know what? No general has authority over him. He's the guy saying it. He's like, because you got to have someone, because you have colonels arguing with each other, majors, everything else. This is the guy that says what comes in, when it comes in, what goes out, when it goes out, right? And he was saying, hey, we're losing ground. The tide's coming in. Stop sending in more troops. Stop it. Cut them off, right? And they were almost ready to take these guys off, but then they pushed in a little more. But until they cleared the beach, they had nowhere to put people. Right? Nowhere to put people. And what happens when you're on a crowded beach? Well,
You're sitting duck.
you're sitting duck. It's a target-rich environment, right? You're no longer throwing the dart at the one balloon to win the stuffed animal, right? No matter where you throw the dart, you're hitting a balloon. All right. So when we come back, the last quarter of the Chief Guard of the Republic radio show in full honor of D-Day. Comrades, this is Chief Guard of the Republic radio show with your co-hosts Mike Tooman and Paul Burvitt every Saturday noon until 2 when we're on the last quarter of the show. You could always call us in at 847-931-1410. 505-926-1410 is our magic. Like I said, I don't even know if these area codes matter anymore, but it would be out of New Mexico. You can hit us up in the comments on the YouTube live channel. All right. And you could watch us on you can listen to us, WRMN1410.com. Just go listen live because sometimes 1410 doesn't come in. Well, if we get a little overcast, we might make it to O'Hare because the way AM amplitude modulation works. And you could always see our shows uploaded as soon as I get to them to our YouTube channel, Chief Guard of the Republic YouTube channel, and we have all of our archived shows there. So if you want to watch them again, but you could always watch them with the commercials on WRMN's channel here. Now, what I was talking about, Paul, is, I always thought that, there were, one of the things they made the movie Gettysburg, all right? And I went through a couple, upper level Army officer courses, right? And they used Gettysburg to try to explain some things. And one of the things you hear about at Gettysburg, with General Lee being the greatest general of the South and everything, is Pickett's charge. And I thought Pickett's charge was an example of some guy that was just so full of himself that he thought, just by the backing of his ego and his, magical grace and everything, that that his troops would go and they would take the key place in the center of the line. All right? And I thought that was kind of dumb, right? But then the explanation comes in and says, listen, and he's talking to Longstreet, right? And he's saying, we can't just move the troops, right? It would be bad for morale. But not only that, if we don't attack now, we're not getting any more resupplies. We're not getting any more men. We're not getting any more ammunition. The South is sending us nothing. We're up in the North now. We're living off the land. That's only going to last so long, right? And meantime, the North will be throwing everything, bringing new troops, fresh troops, food, more ammunition, more whatever. And that, if we don't attack them and destroy them now and disperse them, they're just going to become such an overwhelming force we won't be able to escape. So that's the thing there. And to bring this kind of full circle on this is, why did we have to invade at Normandy at all? Because it's like Pickett's charge almost. You're charging the center of a reinforced line. I mean, you had overwhelming force, right? But again, let's say Rommel had been there, right? And he used and let's say Hitler had been awake because he couldn't sleep and got the information and says, yeah, commit all the armored reserves and push them back into the sea like at Dunkirk, right? And that had happened, right? Massive loss, massive morale loss, right? maybe massive no more support at home for massive loss of life, right? And maybe he gets a negotiated peace. But we're already in Italy. We've already in Europe. We've invaded Sicily. We've had Anzio. We've come up Italy. I think by this time we've actually gotten past Monte Cassino, right? And we're coming up, not the Siegfried line, but Ferdinand line, right? And we're coming to that. And we could push forward, and even Churchill at the time had wanted to push forward to the Balkans, because he said we could land in Greece, push up the Balkans in order to cut the Soviet Union off from Western Europe. You know, if we defeat Germany before the Soviet Union could get there, right? Then there's no reason for an East Germany, right? If we get up the Balkans before the Soviet Union gets in there, then maybe there's a free Romania, Hungary, and a free Bulgaria, right? So we already had established foothold in Europe there, right? We already had North Africa. The difference is the logistical supply lines. In order to get the logistics there by ship, we have to go through the Straits of Gibraltar, right? The Germans still have a very significant submarine corps, U-boat corps, right? They still have some sort of an air force, right? They're in Greece, right? They're in the Balkans. They have a type of air force. The Kabamas in the Mediterranean, if that's our big push. It takes longer. It takes longer for all these things to come through. There's more chance of whatever. Meanwhile, you're just coming straight over from Great Britain. Your logistics are already built up there. Instead of moving them another 1,000 miles, you only got to move them like 30 miles across the ocean. And then they get moved by the Red Ball Express. So what was the reason?
I wanted to read something to you, and,
Sure.
and this was read to all the troops that day. And it says, soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon a great crusade toward which we have strived these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hope and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this year, 1944, much has happened since the triumphs of the 1940-41. Since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home front has given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessings of Almighty God upon the great and noble undertaking. And it was signed Dwight D. Eisenhower on Supreme Headquarters and Allied Expeditionary Force Stationary. So that's exactly what you were saying. The time was right, the battle was set, and there was no time like that time to move forward.
Yeah, and You got to commit. You can't go halfway. You got to commit everything full force. You can't back anything off. You just got to commit at that time. You got to go in fighting hard, right? Fighting hard.
Yep.
Survive the first day. What do you do after you survive the first day, Paul?
You go to the second day.
You survive the second day. You survive the third day.
Right. And then you go onward to victory.
You push forward. You push forward. You push forward. You keep the enemy. It's one thing to fight a defensive war. If you know you're fighting a good defensive war, right? You can really, really cream the thing. Oh, the other thing. All right, so got like 15 minutes or so left, and I want to bring it up to like current events. All right, so we're currently in conflict in Iran, right? And the Straits of Hormuz are kind of like the English Channel. They're like very narrow, right? But we're in conflict with Iran. What is the one thing that France had when we invaded France that Iran does not have?
France had the guerrilla warfare by the Free French.
They had the French underground, the French resistance. Yeah. Not only that, you're right. We had the Free French. We had to stomp the snot out of them in North Africa. Right? The British had to sink nearly all the French Navy in port. Right? So, but we had the Free French, and the Free French not only participated, but you had the French resistance there.
Correct.
So, is there an organized Free Iranian army?
Not that we've seen.
Not that I know of. No. I mean, they've mentioned, the press has mentioned, they always get starry-eyed whenever there's a royal, like the Shah of Iran and the Crown Prince of Iran. They always get starry-eyed, and they're always gushing over this stuff. Any of the, Prince Charles and now King Charles, they're gushing on that stuff. They're gushing on him, right? And they started gushing on this guy. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. Well, he could take over the government, and he would be, like a more open government. I go, no. If he wanted to take over the government, he would be organizing a liberation army, a free army, not just a resistance in the country. You would want a resistance in the country, which I don't think they really have anymore, an organized resistance. But you want at least an organized fighting force and an organized government in exile already established, right? Neither which they have. We got a caller. Howdy. Who's on the line?
Oh, yeah, it's Cleveland Dennis. I'm enjoying the show. I love how you explain all this because, to me, I was going to be asking why we didn't air bomb instead of having, the forces invade from sea at Normandy because there was such a large loss of life, but you basically explained it. And that's much appreciated. I like how you guys do it, and I just want to say this. It's about the warring tribes of Europe.
Yeah.
They're still arguing with me today. Okay?
Yeah.
We're not discussing war, for example, just doing business with them. That's my comment, but I will want to say this. I talked about it being in the United States and maybe Great Britain and Australia being warring people. But I want to tell a little quick story that, I grew up on the near west side of Cleveland, and it was in the late 50s. I was 9 or 10, in the early 60s. There was a lady that was constantly walking from her house to the corner, then bend over and look down the street, towards where the bus arrived. And after a while, I asked somebody in the neighborhood, I go, why does she do that? She's looking for her son who's returning, from the war.
Oh.
In the neighborhood, not only right there, but talking to some of my friends that lived in other neighborhoods, it was so typical how after the war, there were so many widows. And, I'm sure that was all across the U.S., probably in Chicago. But it's one of the things that stuck out in my head. And, again, and I like how you moved on to discuss here momentarily about Iran. Very confusing to me. But I'm just enjoying the show, and that's really all I got.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. And what I want to talk, we had D-Day, we had Incheon, we had D-Day, we had Okinawa, we had Incheon, we had these massive, invasions. Panama, airborne operation, but we already had troops there, right? Desert Storm, massive buildup, massive push out, right? Well, why can't we do Desert Storm in Iran? Well, one, Desert Storm, we had a massive coalition, right? All the Gulf states there didn't want to deal with Saddam, right? And the Iranians would be happy to get rid of Saddam too, right? They won't tell you that. We were actually doing their job for them, I think, right? But here you go, we're in the Straits of Hormuz, and our Navy's there. How many other naval ships have committed from other countries? I mean, really committed?
None.
None. Okay, there you go. Right? Now, so we don't even have a coalition down there. They're all willing to, and this is my opinion, all right? They know it needs to be done. They know. They're just waiting around for us to do it for them. And if we don't do it the way they like, they'll go, oh, bad United States, bad Imperial United States, you shouldn't have done that. Well, why didn't you show us how it's done, Germany? Why didn't you show us how it's done, Great Britain? Why don't you show us how it's done, France? Why don't you show us how it's done, any of these big, quote, NATO powers? Because we'll do it for you. And you know that you could whine and bitch about it because you whine and complain about it because you have no skin in the game. So you're like a big, fat guy sitting in his armchair, all right? Can't get out of his armchair because you're basically immobile, right? Swilling your beer, eating your chips, having the pizza delivered, having your having your nephews and everything feed you with a stick, and you're complaining because you know how to play the football game better. Well, I would have done this, or I would have done that, or I would have done it this way, even though we all know the football games are all fixed, right? So that's my opinion. The sports guys will be mad at me for that. That's my opinion, all right? But yeah, so these guys are armchair quarterbacking us, and guess what? Our press eats it up when they do that. Oh, see, we should be more European. Oh, yeah, we should be more European. All right? How did that work out for our forefathers, Paul?
Not too good.
Yeah, they left Europe because they didn't want to be European. They want to be American. But they're all looking back with this starry eyes. Everything in Europe is so much better than the United States. No, it's not. No, it ain't. We got the greatest country in the history of the world. Greatest country. We got the best of everything. Our chocolate's the best. Our wine's the best. All right? Our guns are the best. Our cars are the best. Oh, well, we got the Rolls Can Hardly, or we got this, we got a Bentleys, or we got these high price. Yeah, for a couple gazillion dollars, right? You could have one of those cars.
Am I still on the line? Can I chirp in about the cars?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I used to do business in the Midlands where they build the Range Rovers and that.
Okay.
And it was nice business at the time, going back and forth with parts, stuff like that, that are needed here for the dealerships, and they would air freight them into O'Hare, and we'd clear customs and deliver them. But my buddy, about 5 years ago, he's richer than I, and not that I'm rich, but he bought a Range Rover. And I went with him to pick it up north at one of the dealers. And, I'm 6'3". My fighting weight's about 190 where I'm at. And he's a little bit, he's a big guy. But when we got in it, I didn't want to criticize him at the time. It took him a couple months.
Yeah, never make fun of a guy's car.
Well, exactly. So after about 3 months, he says, I don't like the car. I'm getting rid of it. I'm going to buy like the big Cadillac or whatever the model is that which he has now. Because he said the Range Rover's too small. I said it's built by the English in the Midlands that I recall, and I was told that they're the descendants of
Pygmies?
people from Scandinavia. And, you know...
Scandinavians are pretty big people, man. My squad leader, Troy, man, that guy was big. He was a big Norwegian.
Well, anyhow, the point is, we do have better cars.
We do everything better, but there are some people that are so self-loathing, or here I don't know. I made up this term, the self-loathing elitist.
That's a good one.
All right. So I'm so mad that I'm in the United States because I'm too smart to live here. I should live in Europe. But because I won't go to Europe, all right, I want Europe to be here. But I hate it here, so I want to change it European because I'm smarter than you because I want to be in Europe. You get where I'm calling about the self-loathing elitist?
I do.
All right? So you would think an elitist would be so narcissistic that he would have no self-loathing at all, right? But no, they're set like that. So when it came to winning the war in World War II, yes, we had a little bit of support from Great Britain. All right? Great Britain got kicked off the main continent. The French got kicked out of their own country, right? And it wasn't until Germany declared war on us, yes, we had some volunteer fighters within the RAF. A few guys went over there, volunteers, right? But it wasn't until Germany declared war on us that we sent over troops, right? And yes, we had our Navy and our Merchant Marine were already out there getting torpedoed by, risking torpedoes and everything. So our Navy's out there and everything, but it wasn't unrestricted warfare yet. Then it did come, all right? So without us, there would not have been a second front in Europe. I'm not saying that the Russians wouldn't have eventually, because they call it the Russian steamroller, right? Once they get rolling, once they start throwing all their Asiatic peoples into the fight, they move them over in the Trans-Siberian Railroad, bring them in, start throwing them into the fight. But where did the Russians get a lot of their early in the war? When they weren't manufacturing at a high enough rate. Everything came through Lend-Lease. They quote bought it from us. Did we ever see a dime of any of that money back?
A couple dollars here and there.
A couple dollars here and there. But it all went up through Murmansk. It came down, They had Shermans. They had a good T-34, but they also had Shermans, right? They started building better aircraft, but they got P-39s. They loved the Air Cobra, We said it was a crappy airplane, right? We used it in the Pacific and everything. But the Russians learned how to use it. They loved this stuff, right? Could the Russians have pushed all the way back to their original border? Probably. Would they have pushed all the way into Germany? I doubt it. They probably would have set up a peace. They probably would have, said, okay, well, let's quit fighting, and they would have divided up Europe again. Well, the Germans would have been happy and moved into all of Europe, right? And then we're fighting the Japanese. Now, even though we're fighting the Germans with the Russians, what weren't the Russians doing?
They weren't fighting the Japanese.
They weren't fighting the Japanese. Until when?
Until after we dropped the atomic bomb.
That's right.
Hey, I wanted to ask Dennis something. You still there, Dennis?
Yeah, and I have another comment, but go ahead with your question.
Dennis, did you catch the big boy when it came through town 2 days ago?
No.
Oh, man.
I didn't.
Well, Dennis, that goes to show you what American ingenuity was in the 40s. It's the same thing that won the war. It was a 1 million pound steam engine, Dennis, and it's still around, and it's going to celebrate the 250th anniversary.
Where?
In cross country. Was it heading west to east or east to west?
It was going east. It was going east.
It was going to the east. So it might be turning around and coming back. We might get a trip.
It'll come back in July, Dennis, but it's a sight to see.
I will make a point to find it then when it comes back. But here's my other comment. After the war, the English made some great post-war movies about the Americans and the contributions that we had.
Well, that's like sending you a thank you card after you give them a $10 billion gift. Here's your thank you card. We're even.
Okay. No, I like your soulful logic. You guys have a great show. I barely miss a
And to
minute
call out to
every week.
all, greatest generation, greatest battle,
Yeah.
like ever. The U.S. Armed Forces combined, for every service was there except for Space Force. Well, and the Air Force didn't exist, but the Army Air Corps did. The Navy, Army, Coast Guard, Merchant Marine, all there.
Never forget D-Day.
Yep.
No
Take
way.
care.
But how come